Welcome everybody to 6 Principles to Improve Your Personal EQ. I don't know how many of you know me personally. I know a few of you. Let me just say that I wrote a book in 2013 called Overcoming Fake Talk. And when I finished the book, I said to my spouse, I said, I blew it. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, we wrote a book about how to hold tough conversations. But you know what? If you learned how to hold those conversations, and you were kind of a jerk, it doesn't matter what's in the conversation or how to hold it. If you're going to treat people with disrespect, it's not going to work. And that got me interested in emotional intelligence. And so I've been working on that since, and was actually hired by the Department of Energy to do research and create a program for them. And I'm halfway through a book on EQ right now, so maybe later in the year. To me, this is a fascinating topic, and hats off to you for being here, because that says, you know what, maybe I could tune myself up a little bit in terms of how I work and deal with others. And so who's this kind of session for? I just thought, this session is for anybody, managers, leaders, basically who wants to understand how they create their emotions. And in doing so, you help to build a culture of psychological safety where people feel free to speak up, talk, be open, candid, which builds respect and trust. But it's important that we also understand today what kind of triggers our emotional reactions, even our violated expectations. So in this session, that's me. Okay, big whoop. All right. Anyway, what is emotional intelligence? It's the ability to recognize your emotions and the emotions of others and know how to manage those feelings so that you get results. So I kind of, instead of 5 areas, I boiled it down to 4. So the 4 areas of emotional intelligence for us are personal awareness, which is understanding what's going on with you. Personal management as well. How do you manage you? And so it's kind of a skill section. Interpersonal awareness is, can you recognize what's kind of going on with other people? And then interpersonal management is, what are some skills that you could use to manage your relationships, your interactions with others, those dynamics in a way that would help you to be much, much more effective. So for this webinar, masterclass, I picked personal awareness because I thought, you know what, we got to start with ourselves. In fact, it's interesting that just a week and a half ago, I had a woman that I'm coaching. And when we started our coaching call, she said, man, I need some help today. I go, what with? She said, I came home late from office, pretty frustrated. And my husband was in the kitchen and kind of messing things up and made a big old mess making some kind of spaghetti sauce. And I said to him, my gosh, you always make messes. I'm kind of, after 30 years, just done with this. And his head dropped and he walked out of the room, and she said, I immediately regretted, what I said. And I felt like the village idiot. And I want to talk about why that happens and what I can do to kind of work on. And so it was that, plus a number of other conversations I've had in the last 6 months. I thought, it's time to do a little bit of a masterclass. So I'm going to talk about principles that will help you increase your personal awareness, but I did build a couple slides earlier this morning with some skills on it, but I will mention a skill in each of the areas. So I hope you're taking notes and you can capture some things that will help you. So this is a question that I get most frequently. Why is it that my emotions seem to come out of nowhere? So here's the deal. I really believe that all of us are like a glass. We're like a container. And we have a number of life's experiences, a number of assumptions, a number of judgments, even feelings that we kind of stuff. We don't know how to get rid of them. So they fill us up. And then something happens during your day. And it's like somebody dropping a pebble or a boulder into the glass. And the water just overflows on to everybody. And that's kind of what happens. We just get so filled up that it doesn't take much. Something happens and our emotions kind of explode and get all over ourselves and everyone else. So the challenge is really to kind of recognize what's going on with us and do some things that will release that pressure or empty the glass. So with that in mind, I don't know how much you know, but how did emotional intelligence come to be? Well, when they started doing research on this topic, they assumed that people with a higher IQ would outperform those with lower IQ most of the time. And as they did this research on emotional intelligence or EQ, they found that people with a higher IQ were outperformed by people with lower IQ. The high IQ guys only outperformed 20% of the time. And the lower IQ folks outperformed the higher IQ 70% of the time. And it was because of this notion of emotional intelligence, understanding themselves, their own feelings, how they got in the way, how to manage them, how to manage other people who are also emotional. So the research turned up the following, which is quite interesting. There are a ton more, but 58% of performance in all type of jobs they estimate has to do with EQ. And 90% of all high performers have high EQ. That would make sense, why they may be leaders, because they know how to manage themselves and manage others. I've always been interested in the third one, that people with high IQ make on an average of $29,000 more a year. So it leads to promotions and opportunities. Obviously, then people with high IQ make better leaders and they live longer. Just some advantages to having high emotional intelligence. So the first question you all had to ask yourself, quite frankly, is what kind of situation or even a person stresses you out? You've got part of personal awareness, right, would be to be able to identify the situation. So if you were in a class with me, that's the first thing I'd have you do coming to class. You got to come with a situation or a person, right, that just pushes your buttons big time. So here's some things that may get you going. I listed a few. Your violated expectations by your coworkers, or maybe stuff's going on at home with the family, right? Or you're the kind of person that your to-do list just gets bigger and bigger by the day, and you're going, maybe you have to deal with very highly emotional or rude people. And of course, this inflation recession stuff, kind of runs in the back of our head. Maybe somebody's always changing your priorities, which is frustrating. Or maybe you struggle with conflict resolution skills, particularly with coworkers or even with management. So you decide, but it would be helpful today if you could think of a situation that may get you going, and then see if you can apply some of what you'll learn to that situation, okay? So let's talk personal awareness. Personal awareness is about how you create your feelings and why your emotions show up sometimes unexpectedly. So the bottom line is your thoughts are responsible for your words, feelings, and actions. Let me explain. This is what we call the process of perception. So let me go through it and then I'll give you an example. So notice on the left, it says data pool. Basically, it's a tree. And this person is observing that event through the lens of their mental models. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. If you were a Covey fan, he'd refer to this as your paradigm. If you were a Hiram Smith fan, president of the Franklin Daytimer Company, he refers to it as your belief window. But we all have this filter or this lens that we've been constructing since we were very young, through which we make observations. And in that process, we select. So this person looking at this event sees kind of a leaflet. Actually, then we take that selected data, we filter it through our mental models again, and here's where we add stuff or subtract stuff. We add stuff we like or we're familiar with, we ignore or subtract stuff we don't like. And then, like pieces of a puzzle, we put those pieces where we think they fit and make an interpretation about what that selected data means. Sometimes the way we interpret causes us to become emotional, sometimes not. But we know for sure that the way we interpret causes us to either act or react. And those behaviors then create results, which then go back into the data pool. This whole process takes place in 1/400th of a second. So let me give you an example. This came out of Forbes. There was a group of young people, 30 of them, who got hired as summer interns for a large bank somewhere in New York City. And part of being in this internship was they had to wear formal attire. So guys wore suits or a nice sport coat with white shirts and slacks, formal shoes, leather shoes. Women wore suits or a nice skirt and jackets. And the interns started to notice after a couple of weeks that there was one woman who always wore kind of flat, comfortable shoes, and she wore pants, always wore pants or slacks. And they started to think, that's not fair. And so they thought, we got to change the dress code here. So they wrote a proposal, they took it to management and asked that the formal attire be changed to informal attire for the summer while they were there. All of the interns signed the proposal except for one. A couple days later, the CEO called all the interns into the big conference room where he there announced they were all fired except for the one who hadn't signed. And obviously they were shocked and they're very upset, very frustrated. And just, the one who kind of was the ringleader spoke up and said, this is not fair. Hey, we think it's over the top to wear these kind of formal clothes. We've noticed whatever her name was, always wear slacks and flat shoes. That's not fair. And the CEO said, did you ever take the opportunity to just talk to her? And they said, no. And he said, if you would have asked her some questions about why she wore the attire that she did, you would have found out that she was in the army and she did 2 tours in Iraq and unfortunately stepped in an IED, which exploded and blew off one of her legs and damaged the other one severely. That's why she's allowed to wear informal clothing. So you'll notice that kind of what's happening is the interns were all observing, right, that one person was wearing informal attire and they were wearing formal, and they selected on that in terms of what they saw. And what did they think? That's not fair. How come she gets to wear informal clothing and we don't? What were they feeling? Probably frustrated, maybe even anger, frustrated over the lack of fairness. I don't know what they said behind closed doors, but what they did is got together, wrote the proposal, and submitted it. So here's the thing that's so interesting about our thinking. We selectively see, hear, and think things, which means that our thinking is incomplete or inaccurate because of this lens. We just don't often stop to say, what is it I'm not seeing? Or is there another way to think about this information? And that's what kind of gets us in trouble. So notice that you create your emotions based on the way you interpret and think about certain people in certain situations. So you could just literally say, right, your thinking, your interpreting fuels your feelings, which in turn fuels what you say and what you do. And then the results that come, kind of are interesting to consider. So if you're taking notes, here's a skill. Let's see if I put a slide in. I didn't. Here's a skill. If you want to get out of your stinking thinking, you have got to be able to make the distinction between what is data and what is interpretation. So the data that they saw was, here's a person that doesn't follow the dress code. They didn't ask her, so they didn't hear anything. But that's what they were thinking. That was what they were seeing. And their thinking was, it's not fair, or we need to change this system. What if there was no data? In reality, they didn't get all the data because they never asked her. They just assumed that she was breaking the dress code and it was allowed. And it was that assumption that drove all this other stuff, what they felt, said, and did, that kind of came back to hurt them. So one of the ways to get out of your thinking is to be able to go look for data and interpretation and separate them and make sure that there is data for your thinking. Unfortunately for them, they miss some of it, okay? Another principle. Unfortunately, our brain does not do us any favors when it comes to emotional intelligence because it's hardwired to react. Let me explain. It's too bad we're not in person, because if we had somebody, I could pull them up next to me, take a swipe at their eyes, and they usually will blink or pull their head back, or they'll even reach up and grab my coming hand with their hand to block it. So let's suppose that this fellow or person sees this big spider, this big tarantula, and it's coming toward them on the ground. That information comes through the eye, travels along the optic nerve to this little organ right here that's called the thalamus. The thalamus is an organ in a person's brain that basically converts visual images, the information that the brain can understand. From the thalamus, the image of the tarantula, let's call it that, is conveyed to the back of the brain, which is the visual cortex. The visual cortex stores visual imagery and compares it to other images that may exist. From the visual cortex, the information is transported to the neocortex at the top of our head. And it's there that we do some rational thinking. Like, is this thing poisonous? How big is it? Can it jump? Am I a safe distance ahead? I mean, that's the neocortex. But from the neocortex, the information about the tarantula is conveyed to our amygdala right here. And the amygdala, once this information shows up, you have 6 seconds to derail it. If you don't, it's going to order the adrenal glands at the top of your kidneys to dump epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, adrenaline into your bloodstream that prepares you for fight or flight. Now you'll notice there's a dotted line, and that's because at the same time that the thalamus is working this circuit right here, the thalamus immediately sends the information to the amygdala in 12 milliseconds, which is way, way fast. In fact, here's the thing that's that the amygdala is doing. It's always asking these 3 questions. It's the protective reactive mechanism of the brain. So it's asking, well, will it hurt me? No. Well, then can I eat it? Or 3, can I mate with it? That once that amygdala fires and you get a chemical dump, it takes 48 hours to get those chemicals out of our bloodstream. That's why you could say to somebody in the office, hey, how's it going today? And they might go, wow, what do you care? And they're emotional because they probably already had a dump and you're wondering what the heck is going on. So here's the deal. When people say and do things to us, right? What happens when we kind of become emotional? Here's what happens. There's your brain normally. That's what's left. The amygdala will shut down the higher functioning regions of the brain to prepare you for fight or flight. So in reality, if you get hijacked by your emotions, there's not much rationality going on. So what does that tell us? Our brain is hardwired to protect us, and that physiology naturally produces an emotional reaction. So when you or other people become highly emotional, you can't think. And the reason you can't is because you're in your amygdala. Right? So if you're taking some notes, I put a slide here. How do we get out of our amygdala and into our neocortex? I'd write this down. You ask yourself questions. So if you did nothing more than say, whoa, what's this all about? What you're doing is forcing yourself physiologically out of your amygdala in your neocortex. And it works just as well if you're dealing with other people. So if you're dealing with somebody and all of a sudden they become emotional, you know, if you just kind of said, wow, I can see you're upset, what's going on? If they have enough presence of mind to answer your question, So let's say they might, oh, nothing. No, really, I want to know. Tell me what's going on with you. Well, they have to physiologically leave their amygdala and go to the neocortex to answer the question. So the more question you ask them, you'll see their emotional intensity subside and they'll return to rationality. So it's a great way of diffusing them. So notice using questions physiologically helps you to reduce your emotional intensity as well as the emotional intensity of others. Okay? Here's what gets interesting. This kind of describes all of us. We all have values. Those values drive our beliefs. Our beliefs, in turn, drive our behavior. And our behavior, in turn, delivers our results. Now, you'll notice at the top, I put emotion. So when I'm dealing with somebody, even myself, and I'm emotional, I know that whatever's happened has basically violated my values. Let me give you an example. This is a piece that I don't know why more people who teach emotional intelligence do not talk about. This, to me, is probably, if I was starring a skill, this would be it. So years ago, I wrote, if you're in my database, about once or twice a month, you'll get an article from me. And I wrote an article called, "Are You Wearing the Emperor's New Clothes?" Which are no clothes at all. And I knew it was going out at 8 o'clock in the morning. And at about 8:02, I got an email from somebody who said, "John, do you not know how to spell?" And I go, "What?" And at first, I'll be honest, I was embarrassed. And then I got another email and another and another. People have accusing me of being a poor speller or being unprofessional. And so obviously my embarrassment turned to anger. I was ticked. I was pretty frustrated. So the question becomes, what was going on? So I emailed my assistant and I said, did you change the spelling of the word emperor? Because I looked at the article, it was misspelled. And she goes, "Yeah, you spelled it wrong." And I go, "Look it up." She emailed back, said, "Oops." So, I just said, "Can we send out, or can we repost it, change it and repost it?" And I'll just email these people and thank them for the response. So notice when she changed the spelling of the word and misspelled it, she violated my value. So when you guys get emotional, and this is going to take some work on your part, you got to know that emotional reactions, whether they're your own or others, usually signal a violated value on the part of other people. Now, this is a different way of kind of recognizing what's going on. Okay, so this is a bit of a skill. What triggers our greatest strength? Your triggers, what values trigger your emotion? Notice that your triggers are your greatest strengths, or what has helped you to be most successful. So if I asked one of you, what's helped you to be successful? And you said, "Well, I'm a really hard worker. Man, I am committed. I will always do what I say." All I have to do to pull that trigger or push that button is to say something to you like, "You know what? Are you just lazy? You're about the most uncommitted person I have ever met. Do you not know what working hard even means?" If I said that to you, boom, immediately that amygdala will fire and you will be off to the races. So here are some questions. And the first one's my fave. What do I want? Or what am I afraid of losing? Or what did I expect to receive? So if you asked that question of me in the situation that I just told you, and there's often more than one of these, what did I want? So here's a list of values I just kind of threw together. And if you look down through it, how many of you think maybe I wanted credibility? You think? You want to raise your hand? Yeah? Or how many of you might think I wanted accuracy? right? I wanted that article to be accurate. I wanted her to, when she mistyped it, should have showed up with a red line underneath it, which should have basically predicted that, the word was spelled wrong, but evidently it didn't for whatever reason. Or maybe I wanted, how about capability? I wanted to be viewed as being capable, as being professional. So there's at least 3. So here's the thing. It's hard to do this on the fly. So to become more emotional intelligent, you have to be able to work on yourself. So if there's a situation or a person that gets you going or pushes that trigger button, at the end of the day, if you just said to yourself, okay, I kind of lost it today with Sam, make up a name. What did I want that I didn't get? Just think about it and don't hesitate to write down more than one value. I know that I get really exercised still today when people are very disrespectful to one another. It just galls me because it impacts what people think, and which means it impacts their performance and can really detract from a culture that you're trying to build, a culture of openness, of respect, of trust, of candor, of sharing, of learning. So I know that about myself, but you have to do the work. You have to be able to work on yourself and start to notice. So if you do that and you can recognize some of your own personal values, if you just all of a sudden find yourself starting to get emotional, it's easy to say, well, what's this all about? Is this about respect? So notice I'm asking myself a question, which gets me out of my amygdala and into my neocortex. And then it causes me to kind of assess the situation. And if you said, yeah, I think it's about respect, then you could say, you know what? Maybe they don't mean to be disrespectful. Maybe I ought to talk about it or check it out with them. And it'll keep you from kind of behaving in those ways that don't help the situation. So this personal values deal or skill is huge. And I would highly recommend it. And when I first kind of discovered this and started to notice, I'll be honest, I worked on it. I worked on it every day. Some days I didn't get emotional, and some days I did. Okay, so here's the bottom line on this principle. Our perception of which of our values has been violated often results in a negative emotional reaction. That's the principle. So how many of you have people that work for you who are always negative or always complaining? Anybody? Yeah. Penny says yes. The rest of you are hiding. Okay, so I assume you do. So get this. This is a different way of learning. When people get negative and they're always whining, complaining, what they're really telling you is that whatever's going on has violated a personal value, or they wouldn't complain. So if I said to one of you, Lori, you never listen to me. You always finish the meeting in a hurry. I never get to say anything. Notice what my value is I have something to say, and I don't feel like I can offer it, or I'm afraid to offer it. So it's a different way of listening, but it will tell you something about the values that people have. So I kind of created this morning to help you a little bit. If you want a skill, here's a skill. You can use this on yourself. State your emotion. I'm angry. Observe your thinking because. And finish that sentence as many times as you can. Once you've done that, you can go back and say, I want to seek to identify my values here. Now, I can't stress the middle one, observe your thinking, enough. Some people like to do this out loud and just listen to themselves. Personally, I like to write it down. So I'll take a piece of paper and I'll go, I'm angry because, and finish the sentence. So let's say one of you didn't come to my meeting today. I'm angry because you were late to the meeting. I'm angry because you said you'd be there and you weren't. I'm angry because now I need to meet with you personally and tell you what went on. I'm angry because we kind of made some decisions, and things you may tell me may alter that decision. And then I may have to go back and tell everyone we're changing the decision. I'm angry because I felt like we've had this conversation twice before and now I have to hold it a third time. I'm angry because it's like I have to support you rather than you supporting me. I mean, you just keep going. And what you'll see is, man, there's a whole lot of stuff floating around in your subconscious, which may be fueling your feelings. And then you could say, well, what were the values I wanted? Well, I wanted everybody to keep their commitment to be there on time. I wanted, I just wanted to be able to rely on everybody. So I wanted reliability. But in doing that, you see how you're starting to understand yourself, not only your thinking, but also kind of what's driving those feelings. So you could take this skill and divide it in two. You could do state the emotion, observe your thinking, or you could add the values part. And I would add the values part after I'd written as many times as I could and just say, what values are reflected in what it is that I'm saying here, or what is it that's important to me? And that'll kind of help you. So look, you want to use your feelings to discover the thinking and the values that are behind your emotional reaction. So I used to like to say, and I still do, that our feelings is a bridge to self-understanding, right? Our feelings demonstrate to us, or they're telling us. It's not like our feelings, people go, oh, are they good or are they bad? It's not they're really good or bad. It's like they're information. Your feelings are information of something that's going on with you. And that's what it is you want to understand, so that you're in charge of the show, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. Here's another way of getting at values. Another principle. It's about violated expectations. So sometimes our violated values will show up as violated expectations. So let's assume I wanted to hold a meeting today. I wanted everyone to be there at 8. I went around individually and asked everyone on my team, 12 people, if they would be there on time at 8, so we could start promptly, be done in 20 minutes, and get on with the day. All right, so your expectations are something that you want or you need. Everybody agreed to that. And then guess what happens? People show up 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 2 trickle in at 30 minutes. And man, I am ticked, right? I'm not very happy. And so if I was breaking this down, right, I'd do expectations first. In fact, here's a story I didn't tell you, but I will. My assistant took a week off to be with her aunt, who lives down in California in Palmdale. And the reason she went down there to take care of her aunt is her son had a business meeting in Washington, D.C. He flew out on a Sunday, did his business by Tuesday, but then hung out in Washington, D.C. for 3 days with his friends visiting. He came back on a Friday. He walked into his mom's hospital room on Friday evening, and it was filled with people. And she was not doing very well. And as he walked in, she turned to my assistant and said, "Could you give me a drink of water, dear?" She got up, got her a drink. So he basically, and his expectation was, I should be the one to fill my mother's needs. What did he observe? His cousin got up and gave his mom a drink of water. What did he think? She robbed me maybe of the last opportunity to serve my mother. Can you see how extreme that gets? Amazing, our thinking. And the emotion, he felt anger and disdain. And what did he do? He asked her to come outside the room and condemned her for taking care of his mom and criticized her. And what did that end up doing? It ended up creating alienation on the part of my assistant, who felt very, very badly. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that he felt badly and called and criticized. So notice the wheelhead that we did, where we were doing observation, thinking, emotion, say and do, and results. You can use that head as a process for understanding how your expectations got violated and how your observations might be short-sighted. Your thinking was one-sided, which created your emotion, your action, and your results. Some people even like to use this in reverse. They like to take results and say, well, what results did I receive? And then what? What did I do or say? What emotion did I feel? What was I even thinking? What did I observe? What did I see or hear? And then what expectation did I have? So notice our expectations often get us in big time trouble. And particularly if they're not realistic. So I could have put skill on this slide. Here's some questions you might want to capture, do a screen capture if you could, or take a picture. But notice, what are my expectations? I've found so many times that some people really aren't even clear with themselves about what their expectations are. But then the second question is pretty powerful. How realistic are my expectations? If you never communicated your expectations, then they may not even be realistic. Was my behavior reasonable? Right? What circumstances might I need to understand? What do I not know? So, the measure of the reasonableness of your expectations will tell you a lot about your thinking. I'll tell you why this kind of blows up on us, I found, is that what we do is we take these values that we have and we project them onto others. They don't know we're projecting them onto others. But then when we assume that those people will kind of act or behave in accordance with our values and then they don't, then obviously our expectations become violated. So if we took the meeting example that I just kind of shared, notice if my expectation is everybody will be on time at 8 o'clock because I talked to everyone ahead of time, then in reality, notice I probably have a value for timeliness. Maybe I have a value for keeping commitments, doing what you say you'll do. And then when people don't keep that commitment and don't do what they say they'll do, then that's how that expectation gets violated. And then I get angry. And that's the source of it. So notice how values and kind of expectations are intertwined. So being clear about what your expectations are and even being able to identify some of your values will really help you kind of what's triggering those emotional reactions. Okay? So here's the principle. When we are unconscious about our expectations, our perception that those expectations have been violated may trigger an emotional response. That's the bottom line. So notice how values and expectations are kind of intertwined. Okay? I added this. I couldn't resist. Our stories get us in trouble as well. So what is our story? Our stories are the recitation of events from our perspective. Our story usually gives us the benefit of the doubt, but it usually will paint others or the situation in a negative light. So what happens is that telling your story ends up creating the drama that intensifies your feeling. And often your story will paint you as the victim and somebody else as the villain. Now, those of you who know me know I was a whitewater guide in Grand Canyon for, too long, 13 years, of 92 trips through the ditch. And the recitation of our story kind of shows up in what I call this intensity cycle. So if I was explaining to you how rapids work, at the top of every rapid is a rock. So here's the rock. The rock is the event. The water runs over the rock, picks up speed. So it's going very fast right through here. And it hits this slower water that's right here. And the intensity of the speed pushes that water up over on top of itself and creates a wave. So at the top of every rapid, there's a rock. And that rock creates the hydraulic of the wave that continually kind of explodes on itself. Well, the event in this case is the starting of this story. So we create this story of the event of what happened. And it picks up speed as we talk about it. And we use words, right, to talk about it. And those words, our brain hears us talk about it. So if I said, oh, she was so unfair to me, she was so rude, and your brain hears that, it goes, yeah, she was rude. And it intensifies the feeling. Now, those of you who've dealt with people, I assume it's most of you, because some of you would come pretty highly qualified. If you have somebody that you're helping or you're coaching or you're mentoring, my guess would be, how many times have you heard them tell the same story? And every time they tell it, the next time they tell it, it's even more intense, right? It's almost to the point, when I was an attorney in another life, I would often do a free consultation with somebody. And people would come in and say, here's my situation. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, here's the situation. Here are your choices. Go make a choice, come back and see me. And they'd come back sometimes in 2 or 3 days and tell me the same story, and only guess what happened this time? And it was even more intense. And I'd have to almost say, oh, let's take a deep breath. By the way, you could write that down. Do you know what taking a deep breath does? It flips you out of your emotional brain to your rational brain. Sometimes you'll have to take 2 or 3 or 4. But oxygenating your brain helps you to get out of your amygdala and into your neocortex. And then we'd have a rational conversation about what was kind of going on, because they were highly emotional. And I remember one woman who came in, and I think it was her 3rd time, and she said to me, what do you think I should do? And I said, go stand in front of the mirror over there on the wall. And she did. And I said, just look at yourself. Of course, now we're rational. And she's looking at herself, and she goes, what? I said, look at your neck. I said, I want you to answer this question. How much pain is enough? And she goes, what? And I said, well, you can't tell me you got those bruises on your neck because your kids were hugging you. What's it going to take? Do you got to get your arm broke? Do you got to get your jaw broke? I just want to know, how much pain is enough? What's it going to take for you to make this decision to either stay or go? It's up to you. I'll help you if you want to go, but you have to make that decision. And she stood there looking at herself for about 30 seconds. And then she said, okay, let's go. And away we went. So I was able to do that because what? I helped to get her out of the intensity of the situation so she could think. So here's the skill part. Recognize and retell. First, you'd ask yourself, what's my story? If you had to write it out so you can see it and think about it. I'm visual, that's why I recommend that. What part am I leaving out or not telling? Or what is the rest of the story? And what do I not know? That's another way of saying, is there another way that I could interpret the same events? But here's the thing. If you can tell a more positive or even a more complete story, that will shift the emotion, because your emotion is based on your thinking. And that thinking is what gets you in trouble, right? Particularly if the emotions are negative and your actions are negative and your results are not what you wanted. Then, all that's telling you something. And it's a chance to take a look at what you're thinking, what story you're telling, what your feelings are, what it is you're saying and doing that's contributing to what you got, okay? So 6th principle would be, telling the complete story breaks the intensity cycle, diffuses the emotion, and allows you to get rational about it. And that's exactly what you want to do. Exactly what you want to do. Okay, so here's the 6 principles we talked about today. You create your emotions by how you think. Sometimes that thinking is actually subconscious. And that's why it's so hard to find. That's why stopping and taking a moment to deliberately think. In fact, when I get emotional, I say, okay, I'm ticked. Pin the thought. I like to say, pin the thought. What's the thought? And then I'll ask myself, is it real? Maybe real in part, but not wholly. And that stops me, and the emotion will subside. Know that your brain physiology basically is you're hardwired to react emotionally. And when we react emotionally, it's hard to back out of that emotion and go and find the thinking or the thought that's kind of driving it. Third, and this is the one I love, is your perception of your violated values is what triggers your emotional reaction. So the challenge becomes, how do I find what my values are? What are they? Did they intentionally violate them? Or is it just me interpreting that they don't value the same things I do? You can SOS your feelings by stating the emotion, observing your thinking by finishing the sentence, I'm angry because, and then go look for the values in that thinking. Notice that another way to look for your values is to look at your expectations. That violated expectations lead to emotional reactions. So if you can identify your expectations and try to figure out what value was violated, then you can see how your expectations become a trigger for emotional reactions as well. And then we talked about recognizing your stories and retelling them. But you first have to recognize what it is you're telling yourself. So, if you got a good friend or respected other, you might even ask them, what kind of story or thing do I complain about all the time? I'd really like to hear your perspective. And they can kind of help you. Okay? So good, we're ahead of schedule. Let me do this quickly, and then I'll answer any questions you have. Okay? So look, I'd like to introduce to you to the fact that I have a real EQ class that's live and online that we basically hold. And it's pretty economical based on kind of what's out there. It's an 8-hour class that'll be held 2 hours every week for 4 weeks. So it looks like this. I'm going to start it a week from today, from 10 o'clock to noon my time, or noon to 2 your time, if you're in the East. So it starts on next Thursday, the 27th, and it'll go every week for 2 hours for 4 weeks. Okay? In the course of that class, here's all the different things that you get. You'll get to take a self-assessment that kind of assess your strengths and opportunity to improve your EQ. There's participant materials that go with it that you'll get. You'll be able to get an online version so you can type on them online while we're talking. You'll be able to get an action planning guide, which will help you to identify some goals and make action plans with specific targeted questions about what you're doing and the way you're dealing with others, and whether or not that's working for you or not. If I was to come and do a one-day class, an 8-hour class at your location, and there were 20 people in the class, the facilitation fee would roughly be about $2,500 a person. But I'm not coming, and there's no expenses, but I added that in there. I will hold office hours during this month, every Friday, from 10 to 11 my time. And you can show up or not. Sometimes only 1 or 2 people will show up, and it ends up like a private coaching session. But even after the class is over, if you have questions and you want to talk, you're struggling with something, I'll take your emails and set up a meeting to visit with you. During the course of the class, I will schedule a 40 to 1 hour call, a coaching call with you, to discuss and explore anything that you're kind of struggling with around your own emotional intelligence. You'll get a set of tool cards. Tool cards basically list the principles and the skills of all the units: personal awareness, personal management, interpersonal awareness, interpersonal management. You get a set of those. And there's Q's and do's. Q's and do's are a set of 12 email lessons that you'll get every other week, which will detail a principle that we learned in the course and give you some things to do to practice that principle in your interactions with others. And those come via email. So if I added all that together, that's the value of the class. And you know what? There is no way I'll charge you a third of that. But here's the thing. Maybe this is not for you, but how open-minded are you to the choices you have? Most people realize they need to work on this either in their professional or personal relationships. And they say they will, but then they don't. And nothing changes. Or you can do like I did out of necessity, where I read everything I could on EQ, right? Looked for articles. I even went and saw a therapist for a while because I wanted to understand how I can improve my relationship with my spouse. It just took a long time to kind of work through that. Or, you can sign up and in 4 weeks have enough skills and arrows in your quiver that'll change the way you interact with others at home and at work for the rest of your life. So, you might ask yourself, what's your lack of emotional intelligence costing you? What would it feel like to get a promotion or improve your income? Or how would it feel like to have greater peace of mind and less stress? Or maybe you'd want to improve productivity, or there's some relationships. Or what would it feel like to have better decisions where you didn't have to do rework, which means your solutions were more efficient? Or maybe you need to improve the employee engagement with the people on your team, which would lessen turnover and reduce feeling overwhelmed. So notice there's a little link there at the bottom of the page. I'm going to paste that link right now in the chat so you can copy it. Did it copy? No, it did not. That stinks. Let's do this. Okay, there it is right there. Let me do this. I'm going to stop the screen share. Don't worry, we'll do this right. Here's old Brad. I'll copy it. I don't know what happened. Let me just copy the link. Okay. Go back. Share the screen. Okay. Now I'll put it in the chat. Sorry about that. Okay. So there's the link. If you'll copy that link, what will happen is it will take you to a page that looks like, okay. It looks like this. So that's the page it'll take you to, dialogueworksacademy.com/EQ-live-online. This page has all kinds of details. If you have a manager that wants to know what this class is all about, there's all kinds of stuff here about the training program, about me. It has testimonials by people who've basically taken the class, all the stuff that you'll get that I already detailed. And you get to the bottom, here's the prices. But here's the deal. Today, I'm going to give you a little promo code. So if I click on choose this option, it brings up the payment. The promo code is EQ now. and you apply it, and it'll reduce the price of the class to $697. Okay, that's what it'll do. So note, I don't know why Brad keeps coming up. If I share screen and I go back to that, no, that one. That's where we're at. If you'll just remember that, I don't even think you need to type it in caps like that. If you just type in EQ now, it'll reduce the price of the course to $697. If you have groups because you're with a company, if you have more than 50 people you'd like to put through it, there's an email on that page. Basically, just call us and we'll strike a deal that'll work for you. But there's the link and it's in the chat. So I'd copy that. Okay, so there we are. What questions do you have? If you want to unmute yourselves and ask the question, let's go for it. Anyone?
John, my
Yes,
chat.
sir. Hey, Brad, how's it going?
Good, sir. How are you? Hey,
I'm good.
hey, my chat is not showing any of the links, etc., that you just mentioned.
All right, let's see. Let me go to the chat again and paste it in there. Can you see it now? Is it in there now?
That wouldn't let me unmute. I'm just, well, maybe that's it. Okay, there it is. Yeah. Okay.
DialogueWorksAcademy.com/EQ-live-online. Got her?
I had a diagram. There's some others up above it too. So, okay, I see it.
Somehow a picture got in there.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you, Brad, for doing that. You never know when you're blowing it. Okay, Rosa, you raised your hand. I'm calling on you. Go for it.
Thank you, John. I am a mediator, and usually I found parties very high emotional. What can I do on a specific technique that I can use in a mediation session to calm down people?
Okay, first thing you do is never say calm down.
You told me that in another webinar. Yes, I remember.
So, I would do this. I would probably reflect to them what you're seeing. I can see you're upset. Help me understand why. Get them to recite what it is that's got them going. And as they're reciting it, I would listen intently and listen for values. And if you can't identify what the value is, then ask them. They might not be able to answer what's your value. So I'd ask it this way: of everything you've told me, what's most important? What is it that you'd absolutely want to have happen? And they'll tell you in that. They'll answer that. Or you might see them pause and say, whoa, I don't know. And just tell them, to move forward in this mediation. We need to identify what it is that's most important to you. So can I tell you a story? So I was doing a divorce between a man and a woman, and I was representing the man, and we just could not get anywhere. And I finally said to the woman and her attorney, I want you to think about what it is that's most important to you. And we'll go get an ice cream cone and be back in 20 minutes. So we came back and I asked the question, so what is it that's most important? And this ticked off her attorney because she said, I want the dishes. And he's going, what? I want the dishes that were my grandmother's. So these dishes, being in Utah, were dishes that came across the plains in a covered wagon. And I said, then we want the car. And her attorney goes, no. I go, wait a minute. Let me tell you why we want the car. He has to have a way to get to work so he can pay alimony and child support. And she, before he could say anything, she said, that's okay with me. So notice that the value that the attorney placed on the dishes versus the car, she didn't put any monetary value. It was an emotional value. It was a family heritage kind of a value. And that's why you got to get to, if you say, what do you want and why? The why question will get to the values. Does that help you?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. I
Okay.
take notes about everything. And just one more question, if I can. When you talk about self-awareness, the first competence of emotional intelligence, it is about that I have the right to think about my own emotional state.
Yes. Yeah, you want to understand yourself. This is about understanding you and what triggers you. Why do these emotions come up?
Mhm.
And it will require you to do some personal work. And if people aren't willing to do the work, then they're not going to find out, which means they're going to keep going off. So people saying do things, and I really don't think that oftentimes people really intend to go out of their way to personally offend us. We take offense. We like to take offense where maybe no offense was given, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, you got to understand yourself.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else have a question about anything I said today? You're good? Something you're just dying to know, but you're afraid to say? You're all hiding. I can't see your lovely faces and stuff. All right, look, I very much appreciate you coming today. Pat yourself on the back. Yay, give yourself a big hooray. Because you came, because obviously you thought that there was something that you could learn that would help you. So I hope that you did learn something that would help you become more aware about what it is that you're doing. And if you feel like you want to be part of this class, man, I would love for you to be part of this class that starts next week, so we could do something and give you the full array of information about and principles about emotional intelligence and how you could improve your EQ and improve your relationships personally and professionally. Anyway, you guys take care and have a great day. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.